The dominion of Arkenmere was a land where wealth decided a person's worth and noble blood ruled over millions. Among its most powerful men stood Duke Roderick Ashthorne, master of vast estates, owner of merchant fleets, and one of the richest nobles in the kingdom. Yet despite his success, people whispered about him constantly. Not because of his wealth, not because of his influence, but because he had 5 wives. Duchess Eveline controlled powerful banking interests. Duchess Celestia came from a family close to the royal throne. Duchess Isolde belonged to an ancient noble bloodline. Duchess Vivian's family dominated international trade. Duchess Rosamond's relatives commanded much of the kingdom's military strength. Together they formed a perfect political alliance. At least that was how it appeared from the outside. Inside Ashthorne Manor, the 5 duchesses were locked in a silent war. Every smile concealed jealousy. Every conversation hid competition. Every woman wanted to become the most influential person in the Duke's life. Over time, Roderick grew tired of the endless games. Whenever business took him away from the manor, he welcomed the escape. One cold autumn morning, while returning from inspecting remote lands near the Blackstone Highlands, he stopped at a small market town called Thornwick Crossing. The place was poor and neglected. Merchants sold worn goods. Children ran barefoot through muddy streets. Hungry faces filled the crowded marketplace. As Roderick walked among the stalls with several guards, a loud voice caught his attention. $5! Only $5! Somebody take her! Curious, he turned toward the commotion. A crowd had gathered around a wooden platform. Standing upon it was a young woman dressed in worn grey clothing. Her dark hair partially covered her face. She looked exhausted and thin, but something about her seemed unusual. The auctioneer continued shouting, $5! Her owner is dead! No family, no future, no one wants her! Laughter rippled through the crowd. She's worthless, not even worth $5. Who would buy her? The young woman remained silent. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply stood there with quiet dignity. Roderick frowned. That dignity didn't belong to a slave. He stepped closer. "What is your name?" he asked. Slowly, the girl lifted her gaze. Her eyes were strikingly intelligent. "Aveline, my lord," she replied softly. Her voice surprised him. It sounded educated, refined. Nothing about her matched the image being presented to the crowd. The auctioneer rushed forward. "Your Grace, don't waste your time. Nobody wants her." Roderick continued studying the young woman. Something told him there was more to her story. Without fully understanding why, he reached into his coat and removed a small pouch of coins. "I'll buy her." The marketplace instantly fell silent. "See," the auctioneer stared in disbelief. "You wish to purchase her?" "Yes." Within minutes, the transaction was complete. $5 changed hands. Papers were signed. And just like that, the girl everyone considered worthless became the property of one of the most powerful men in Arkenmere. As they prepared to leave, an elderly merchant muttered quietly, "Either the Duke is a fool, or he sees something nobody else can." During the journey home, Aveline rarely spoke. Yet Roderick noticed strange things. When a steward struggled to calculate trade expenses, she corrected the figures instantly. When soldiers discussed neighboring kingdoms, she identified their rulers, economies, and military strengths. When they passed an abandoned fortress, she accurately described its history. Every answer deepened the mystery. No ordinary servant possessed such knowledge. By the time they approached Ashthorne Manor 3 days later, Roderick had become more curious than ever. Meanwhile, news of the purchase had already reached the manor. The 5 duchesses gathered inside the crystal salon. "A slave girl?" Duchess Eveline asked. "Purchased for $5? Duchess Celestia laughed. "Surely our husband has finally lost his senses." But Duchess Isolde remained thoughtful. "No," she said quietly. "Roderick rarely does anything without reason." The room fell silent. Suddenly, the women felt uneasy. A woman personally chosen by the Duke represented a possible threat, no matter how insignificant she appeared. Later that afternoon, the Duke's carriage rolled through the gates. The 5 duchesses stood waiting. When Aveline stepped from the carriage, most of them relaxed. She looked poor, weak, harmless. Certainly not someone capable of challenging them. Yet as Aveline briefly raised her eyes, Duchess Isolde felt an unexpected chill. For a split second, she saw confidence hidden beneath the girl's humble appearance. Then it disappeared. That evening, Aveline was assigned a small room near the servants' quarters. Once alone, she locked the door and reached beneath the lining of her cloak. From a hidden pocket, she removed a silver medallion. The symbol engraved upon it belonged to House Valmere, a royal bloodline believed to have been destroyed 20 years earlier. Tears filled her eyes as she stared at the crest. "They still think I'm dead," she whispered. Hundreds of miles away, in the capital city, an elderly nobleman received a secret report. The moment he read it, his hands began to tremble. After 20 years of searching, a clue had finally appeared. The missing heir of House Valmere might still be alive. And at that very moment, she was living beneath the roof of Duke Roderick Ashthorne. If you're enjoying this story so far, tell us in the comments what you think Duke Roderick saw in Aveline that everyone else missed. And if you love dramatic tales filled with secrets, noble intrigue, and shocking twists, be sure to subscribe to Sandy Love Tales and join our growing family. The morning after Aveline's arrival at Ashthorne Manor, curiosity spread through every hallway, servant quarter, and noble chamber. The story of the $5 slave girl had already become the most discussed topic on the estate. Servants expected to see a frightened young woman struggling to adapt to her new life. Instead, they found someone entirely different. Aveline accepted every task without complaint. She swept floors, organized supplies, carried laundry, and assisted kitchen staff with quiet efficiency. Yet there was something unusual about her. Her posture remained elegant, her speech was refined, her manners were flawless. Even elderly servants who had spent their entire lives serving noble families noticed it. This girl did not behave like someone born into poverty. Before long, whispers began spreading throughout the manor. The 5 duchesses noticed as well. During breakfast, Duchess Celestia decided to test her. As servants moved around the dining hall, Celestia deliberately knocked over a cup of tea, spilling it across an expensive imported tablecloth. "You there," she called. "Clean that mess." Aveline immediately stepped forward and began cleaning. Celestia watched closely. "Tell me, girl, were you always a servant?" Aveline lowered her gaze. "No, Your Grace." Several duchesses exchanged glances. "What were you before?" Celestia asked. Aveline paused. "Someone who had a family." The answer revealed nothing. Celestia frowned. She hated being denied information. Across the table, Duchess Isolde watched carefully. The girl was hiding something. She could feel it. Later that afternoon, a crisis erupted within the estate's business offices. One of Duke Roderick's chief accountants rushed into his study carrying several trade ledgers. A major shipment appeared to have disappeared from the records. Thousands of dollars were missing. The accountant looked terrified. "Your Grace, we've checked every page repeatedly. We cannot locate the error." Roderick studied the books while several advisors examined the figures. Nobody could explain the discrepancy. At that moment, Aveline entered carrying a tray of tea. As she placed the cups upon the table, her eyes briefly scanned the open ledgers. She immediately noticed the problem. Before she could stop herself, she spoke. "The shipment totals are accurate." Every person in the room turned toward her. The accountant blinked. "What?" Aveline pointed toward one page. "The mistake isn't in the shipments. It's in the customs taxes. Someone copied the percentage incorrectly 3 months ago, and the error continued through every calculation afterward." Silence filled the room. The accountant grabbed the ledger and began checking frantically. Within moments, his face turned pale. She was right. Every missing dollar instantly reappeared once the mistake was corrected. The advisors stared at her in disbelief. Roderick slowly leaned back in his chair. "How did you discover that so quickly?" Aveline immediately regretted speaking. "I was fortunate, Your Grace. Nobody believed her. Not even slightly. The accountant had spent days searching for the error. Aveline had solved it within seconds. News traveled through the manor faster than wildfire. By evening, every servant knew the story. The 5 duchesses gathered inside the crystal salon once again. A servant who understands international trade records? Duchess Vivian asked skeptically. And tax calculations, added Duchess Eveline. Not to mention accounting. Duchess Rosamond folded her arms. She's lying about who she is. For the first time, all 5 women agreed completely. Aveline was hiding a secret. The only question was how important that secret truly was. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in the capital, Lord Septimus Valmere sat alone in his study, staring at old family portraits. 20 years earlier, House Valmere had suffered a devastating attack. Assassins had slaughtered nearly everyone connected to the bloodline. Only one child had escaped the massacre, a little girl who vanished without a trace. For 2 decades, Septimus had searched tirelessly. Every lead ended in disappointment. Every rumor proved false. Then, a messenger arrived, carrying new information. "My lord," the man said, "we've confirmed it." Septimus rose instantly. "Confirmed what?" "The girl purchased by Duke Ashthorne bears remarkable similarities to the missing Lady Aveline Valmere. The age is correct. The appearance matches surviving descriptions." The old nobleman's hands began trembling. "Prepare my carriage immediately." "Tonight?" the messenger asked. "Tonight," Septimus replied. "If that girl truly is my granddaughter, I have already lost 20 years. I will not lose another day." Back at Ashthorne Manor, Aveline sat alone in her small room. The silver medallion rested in her hands. For years she had hidden her identity. For years she had survived by remaining invisible. Yet now everything seemed to be changing. She remembered the night her family died, the flames consuming their estate, the screams echoing through dark hallways. The loyal servant who carried her to safety, the endless years of hiding. Tears filled her eyes. Suddenly, a knock sounded at her door. She quickly concealed the medallion beneath her clothing. "Come in," she whispered. The door opened. Duke Roderick stood in the doorway. Aveline immediately rose to her feet. "Your Grace." Roderick studied her quietly. "I have a question." "Yes, Your Grace. You can read trade ledgers, a little. You understand taxation, somewhat. You know history, politics, and foreign kingdoms." Aveline remained silent. Roderick stepped closer. His steel-grey eyes never left hers. "Who are you really?" Her heart pounded. One wrong answer could destroy everything. For several long seconds, neither spoke. Finally, she lowered her gaze. "I am only your servant, Your Grace." Roderick knew she was lying. Yet surprisingly, he chose not to press further. "Very well," he said. "But someday, Aveline, you will tell me the truth." As he left, Aveline felt both relieved and frightened, because she sensed something dangerous was beginning. The Duke trusted her more each day, and that trust would soon make her the target of every duchess in the manor. Unaware of the storm approaching, the household settled into sleep. But far beyond the estate walls, a black carriage raced through the darkness toward Ashthorne Manor. Inside sat Lord Septimus Valmere, carrying documents capable of proving that the $5 slave girl was not a servant at all, but the last surviving heir of one of the most powerful noble houses in the kingdom. If you're enjoying this story, tell us in the comments whether Aveline should finally reveal her true identity or continue hiding her secret. And if you love emotional stories filled with mystery, noble intrigue, and shocking twists, don't forget to subscribe to Sandy Love Tales and tells us where you are watching from. The arrival of Lord Septimus Valmere changed everything. His black carriage rolled through the gates of Ashthorne Manor just after sunrise. Servants rushed to announce the unexpected visitor, while guards immediately recognized the crest displayed upon the carriage door. Within minutes, word spread throughout the estate. One of the kingdom's most respected nobles had arrived without warning. Duke Roderick personally greeted the elderly man in the grand entrance hall. "Lord Valmere," Roderick said politely, "this is an unexpected honor." Septimus barely acknowledged the greeting. His eyes searched the room urgently. "Where is she?" Roderick frowned. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "The girl," Septimus replied. "The one you purchased in Thornwick Crossing." The Duke's expression hardened slightly. "Aveline?" "Yes." Before Roderick could ask another question, the 5 duchesses entered the hall. They immediately sensed something unusual. The old nobleman's arrival had nothing to do with politics or business. His entire focus seemed centered on a single servant girl. Moments later, Aveline was summoned. When she entered the hall, carrying herself with her usual humility, Lord Septimus froze. His eyes widened, his hands trembled, tears instantly filled them. Aveline stopped walking. Something about the elderly nobleman felt familiar. "My child," Septimus whispered. The room fell silent. Nobody understood what was happening. Septimus slowly stepped forward. "Look at me." Aveline obeyed. The old nobleman reached into his coat and removed a faded portrait. It showed a noble family standing together many years ago. A little girl stood beside her parents. The resemblance was undeniable. The same silver blue eyes, the same dark brown hair, the same delicate features. Aveline's hands began shaking. Memories she had buried for years suddenly flooded back. "No," she whispered. Septimus opened another document. It contained records, birth certificates, family seals, and testimonies gathered during his 20-year search. "You are not a servant," he said softly. "You are Lady Aveline Valmere, the last surviving heir of House Valmere." The entire hall exploded into stunned silence. The 5 duchesses stared in disbelief. Servants gasped openly. Even Duke Roderick looked shocked. Aveline could barely breathe. For 20 years she had hidden from the world. For 20 years she had convinced herself that her old life was gone forever. Yet now the truth stood before everyone. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Grandfather," she whispered. Septimus broke down completely. He rushed forward and embraced her. "I've searched for you for 20 years. Many servants found themselves wiping away tears. The reunion was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the duchesses felt their world shifting beneath their feet. The girl they had mocked was not a slave. The girl they had ordered around was not a servant. She was the heir to one of the wealthiest noble houses in the kingdom. Duchess Celestia turned pale. Duchess Eveline looked horrified. Duchess Vivienne suddenly remembered every rude word she had spoken. Duchess Rosamond stared at the floor. Only Duchess Isolde remained calm. Deep down, she had always suspected the truth would be extraordinary. Later that day, Lord Septimus presented additional evidence before several witnesses. There could be no doubt. Aveline was officially recognized as Lady Aveline Valmere, the legal heir to vast lands, immense wealth, and powerful political influence. By sunset, messengers were already carrying the news throughout the kingdom. Noble families reacted with astonishment. Merchants discussed it in every marketplace. Court officials struggled to believe the story. The missing Valmere heir had been found, and she had been purchased for $5. That evening, Aveline stood alone in the manor gardens, trying to process everything. The life she had known was gone forever. Footsteps approached behind her. Duke, Roderick. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, he smiled slightly. "So," he said, "you weren't merely a servant after all." Aveline laughed softly through her tears. "I suppose not. You lied to me. I had to survive." Roderick nodded. He understood. For several moments they stood together beneath the evening sky. Then Aveline looked toward him. "Why did you buy me?" she asked. Roderick smiled. "I still don't know." The answer made her laugh again. Yet both understood the truth. From the very beginning, something had drawn them together. Not status, not wealth, not titles. Something deeper, unseen, genuine. Unfortunately, not everyone was happy about the revelation. Deep inside Ashthorne Manor, several duchesses were already holding a secret meeting. Their fear had grown. Before, Aveline had merely been a servant. Now she possessed wealth and influence rivaling their own. Worse still, Duke Roderick clearly trusted her. Duchess Celestia slammed her hand against the table. "If she remains here, everything changes." The others exchanged worried looks. For the first time, they shared a common enemy. And before the meeting ended, a dangerous decision was made. They would remove Aveline from Ashthorne Manor permanently, no matter what it cost. Unaware of the conspiracy forming around her, Aveline looked toward the stars that night, feeling hopeful for the first time in years. She had found her family. She had recovered her identity. She had survived. But she had no idea that her greatest challenges were only beginning. If you're enjoying this story, Tell us in the comments how you think the duchesses will react now that Aveline's true identity has been revealed. And if you love dramatic stories filled with shocking twists, powerful emotions, and noble intrigue, don't forget to subscribe to Sandy Love Tales so you won't miss next the twist. The morning following the revelation of Aveline's identity did not bring peace to Ashthorne Manor. Instead, it brought silence so heavy it felt unnatural, as though the estate itself was waiting for judgment to fall. Messengers arrived before dawn, carrying orders from the capital. By mid-morning, royal archivists, legal historians, and neutral court officials had assembled in the Grand Hall. Word had spread across the kingdom. The disputed identity of Lady Aveline Valmere would be tested publicly under royal verification protocol. Duke Roderick stood at the center of it all, expression unreadable. He wore his midnight black velvet ducal coat with silver embroidery, silver cloak draped across his shoulder, steel-grey eyes scanning every official present with controlled authority. Beside him stood Lord Septimus Valmere, visibly exhausted but unwavering, gripping his cane tightly. Across the hall, the 5 duchesses stood in a tense formation. Duchess Evelyn's emerald gown shimmered under the chandeliers, her blonde coils perfectly arranged but her expression tight with concern. Duchess Celestia's burgundy velvet dress looked elegant as always, though her amber eyes betrayed irritation. Duchess Isolde remained composed in her sapphire gown, dark braided hair framing a face that revealed little emotion. Duchess Vivienne adjusted her golden cream gown nervously, while Duchess Rosamond stood rigid in crimson, military-like posture unbroken but tense. At the center of the hall stood Aveline. She wore her worn grey dress and weathered cloak, the same simple clothing that had once marked her as nothing more than a servant. Yet now, every eye in the room followed her differently. Not as a slave, not as a servant, but as a question waiting to be answered. The head archivist stepped forward. We will begin the verification of House Valmere lineage through 3 stages: seal authentication, bloodline registry comparison, and historical witness confirmation. The first stage began immediately. Ancient wax seals were brought forward in iron cases. The Valmere crest, a silver-blue insignia of a forgotten noble house, was examined under magnification. Each seal matched the records preserved in the royal archives. No forgery was detected. A murmur passed through the hall. The second stage involved registry comparison. Birth records from 20 years ago were carefully laid beside reconstructed noble census data. The archivists checked signatures, dates, and recorded witnesses, every detail aligned. Lord Septimus closed his eyes briefly, as though reliving every year of his search. Aveline stood still, her hands trembling slightly, as fragments of memory surfaced in her mind but refused to fully form. Then came the third stage, witness confirmation. 3 surviving nobles who had known House Valmere were brought forward. Each examined Aveline carefully. One by one, they nodded in recognition. "It is her," one said quietly. "There is no doubt," said another. The final confirmation hung in the air like a verdict waiting to fall. The head archivist stepped forward once more, voice solemn. "Based on all verified records, seals, and witness testimonies, we confirm with absolute certainty that the individual known as Aveline is Lady Aveline Valmere, last surviving heir of House Valmere." Silence collapsed over the hall. It was not the silence of confusion, but of finality. Lord Septimus exhaled shakily, tears finally breaking through his restraint. Aveline's knees nearly gave way as the weight of identity settled fully onto her shoulders. Duchess Eveline looked away, her pride shaken. Duchess Celestia clenched her jaw in frustration. Duchess Vivienne avoided eye contact entirely. Duchess Rosamond stared at the floor as if calculating consequences. Only Duchess Isolde remained outwardly unchanged, though her eyes had narrowed slightly, recognizing the shift in power that had just occurred. Duke Roderick raised a hand, and the hall quieted instantly. "Then it is decided," he said firmly. "From this moment forward, Lady Aveline Valmere is recognized under full noble authority and protected under royal jurisdiction." A second wave of silence followed, deeper than before. That statement did more than confirm identity. It elevated status. It placed Aveline beyond the control of ordinary noble rivalry. The duchesses understood it immediately. Their influence over her had ended, and something far more dangerous had begun. As the court officials began to withdraw, whispers spread through the hall like smoke. Nobles from other houses who had attended began exchanging uneasy glances. The return of House Valmere meant redistribution of influence, land claims, and political alliances across the kingdom. The balance of power was shifting, and Ashthorne Manor had become its center. That evening, Duke Roderick dismissed the court formally. But instead of relief, tension deepened. As the hall emptied, he remained behind, studying the remaining figures carefully. One by one, he dismissed the accusations brought earlier in the week. Anonymous letters, suspicious claims, inconsistent reports. He spoke calmly but firmly. These actions were not coincidence. His gaze moved slowly across the duchesses. They were coordinated. Duchess Celestia stiffened. "Are you accusing us?" Roderick did not answer immediately. Instead, he placed a sealed report on the table. Evidence traced financial movements behind the anonymous accusations. Payment routes, delivery points, internal access records. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone within the manor had orchestrated the attempts to discredit Aveline. The air in the hall tightened. Duchess Aveline stepped forward defensively. "This is an interpretation, not proof." Roderick finally looked at her directly. "It is enough for investigation." Lord Septimus spoke quietly beside him. "Anyone who would attempt to destroy my granddaughter's identity will answer for it." The threat was not loud, but it was absolute. By nightfall, the manor had changed again. Servants moved carefully, avoiding conversation. Guards were doubled at key entrances, and inside the highest tower room, Aveline sat alone trying to process what she had become. No longer a servant. Not yet fully a noble in feeling, something in between. A knock came at her door. When she opened it, Duke Roderick stood there. "You're not resting," he observed. Aveline shook her head slightly. "I don't think I know how anymore." Roderick stepped inside without asking permission. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "You will not be left unguarded." Aveline looked at him carefully. "Because of duty." Roderick paused, then answered honestly, "Because this has stopped being only duty." Outside, the wind moved through Ashthorne Manor like an approaching storm, and somewhere within its walls, unseen hands were already preparing the next move. If you're enjoying this story, tell us in the comments what you think the duchesses will do next now that they've been exposed. And if you love emotional, noble dramas filled with secrets, power struggles, and destiny, subscribe to Sandy Love Tales and tell us where you are watching from. Our next story might be from your region. The night over Ashthorne Manor was not just cold. It felt alive with tension, as though the entire estate was holding its breath before something irreversible. Every corridor, every candlelit hall, and every shadowed staircase seemed heavier than before, carrying the weight of secrets that could no longer remain hidden. Beneath the western wing, in a concealed council chamber carved into old stone, the 5 duchesses gathered once again, not as allies of convenience, but as individuals bound by fear of losing everything they had built. Duchess Aveline paced slowly in her emerald green silk gown with intricate gold embroidery, her blonde royal coils perfectly styled, yet slightly tense at the edges, her icy blue eyes sharp and unsettled as she broke the silence. "We are losing control of the entire situation," she said firmly, her voice controlled but edged with frustration. Duchess Celestia stood near the long wooden table in her burgundy velvet gown with pearl accents, her chestnut brown hair flowing in soft waves over her shoulders. Amber eyes narrowed with irritation and calculation as she replied, "Control was already slipping the moment the Duke began trusting her more than us." Duchess Vivienne, restless and visibly uneasy in her gold and cream gown with delicate lacework, kept her hands pressed against the table as if grounding herself. Her auburn curls slightly disheveled as she whispered, "Then we must make him question everything he believes about her. If doubt enters his mind, trust will collapse." Duchess Rosamond stood rigid in her crimson military-inspired gown with structured shoulders and sharp tailoring, her dark brown pinned hair reflecting candlelight as she spoke in a low, firm tone. "If we miscalculate this, we won't just lose influence. We will lose standing in the entire kingdom." Duchess Isolde remained seated, composed and unreadable in her sapphire blue gown with silver embroidery. Her raven-black braided crown hairstyle perfectly arranged as her grey eyes studied the others with cold precision. After a long pause, she finally said, "Then stop acting emotionally. We don't attack her directly. We dismantle her credibility step by step." On the table between them lay carefully prepared forged documents, manipulated correspondence, altered financial records, and fabricated witness statements designed not just to question Aveline, but to fracture the trust between Duke Roderick, Lord Septimus Valmere, and the royal court itself. Their plan was no longer a suggestion whispered in fear. It was now structured, deliberate, and ready to be deployed. Somewhere above them, unnoticed, a servant paused briefly near the corridor entrance, hearing just enough to understand the danger before silently retreating into the darkness without revealing their presence. By dawn, that silence would already have consequences. As morning arrived, Ashthorne Manor had transformed into something closer to a controlled fortress than a noble residence. Guards had been doubled at every gate and hallway junction, royal seals were placed across restricted archives, and official court scribes were stationed throughout the estate. Duke Roderick summoned an emergency court session in the Grand Hall, a decision that immediately sent ripples through every level of nobility present. Aveline was the first to arrive, escorted by guards but not restrained, her worn grey linen dress simple and unadorned, its faded fabric contrasting sharply with the grandeur around her. Her weathered dark cloak hung loosely over her shoulders, and her long dark brown hair fell naturally, unstyled, emphasizing her vulnerability within the space. Her silver blue eyes carried exhaustion but also quiet awareness as she stepped into the center of the hall without hesitation, standing alone while nobles slowly filled the room around her. Lord Septimus Valmere arrived shortly after, his presence immediately shifting attention. His dark navy aristocratic coat with faded silver embroidery reflected years of history and loss, and his trembling hands gripped a carved cane engraved with the Valmere crest. His blue-grey eyes scanned the hall with protective urgency, never leaving Aveline for long. The 5 duchesses entered last, moving in a deliberate formation that reflected unity on the surface, but tension underneath, each taking positions behind Duke Roderick as if preparing for confrontation rather than court procedure. Duke Roderick stood at the high table, his midnight black velvet ducal coat with silver embroidery sharply defined under the chandelier light, his silver cloak draped with controlled elegance over one shoulder. His steel-grey eyes moved across the room with calculated precision, reading every shift in posture, every reaction, every silence. He placed a sealed report onto the table with deliberate calm. "These documents arrived during the night," he said evenly, his voice controlled but firm. "They concern the origin of the accusations made against Lady Aveline Valmere." The hall immediately fell into absolute silence. Duchess Celestia was the first to respond, her tone sharp but carefully controlled. "Accusations?" she repeated, as if testing the word. Duchess Evelyn stepped slightly forward, her emerald gown catching the light as she said, "There are no accusations without reason." Duchess Vivian added quickly, her voice tense, "There are inconsistencies that have not been properly addressed." Duchess Rosamond remained silent but visibly stiffened, her posture signaling discomfort. Duchess Isolde said nothing at all, her silence more telling than any argument. Roderick opened the report slowly, revealing pages filled with traced financial transactions, courier logs, and sealed correspondence records. Each line of evidence pointed back to coordinated actions originating from within Ashthorne Manor itself, not external forces, not rumors, but internal orchestration. A quiet murmur spread through the hall as nobles leaned forward, realizing the implication. Lord Septimus stepped forward, his voice low but powerful despite age. "Anyone who attempts to destroy my granddaughter's identity will answer before the crown itself," he said, his emotional restraint finally breaking through in controlled anger. The atmosphere shifted instantly from investigation to political threat. Duke Roderick raised one hand and silence returned immediately. His gaze moved slowly across each duchess. "This is not interpretation," he said firmly. "It is traced fact, supported by multiple verified sources." Duchess Celestia's expression tightened further. "And you believe we orchestrated this?" she asked, her voice sharper now. Roderick did not answer immediately. Instead, he said, "I believe the truth will remain even after scrutiny." That single statement intensified the tension further because it did not deny accusation nor confirm innocence. By midday, a formal investigation was declared across Ashthorne Manor. Royal auditors were brought in, internal communications were sealed, and all correspondence within the estate was placed under review. What had once been a noble residence had now become a living courtroom where every movement could be evidence. Aveline remained at the center of it all, standing quietly through the chaos, overwhelmed by the scale of forces now moving around her life. Yet for the first time, she was not being erased or ignored. She was being defended and examined as truth rather than rumor. That evening, after the court had dispersed into uneasy silence, Duke Roderick found Aveline standing alone in the upper corridor near the tower stairs. The hall was dim, lit only by distant torchlight flickering across stone walls. "You should not be alone here," he said quietly as he approached. Aveline turned slightly toward him, her expression tired but composed. "I am always alone," she replied softly. Not as complaint, but as fact shaped by her past. Roderick stopped a few steps away, his posture less formal than before, less political and more human. "Not anymore," he said. Aveline looked at him for a long moment, as though trying to understand whether that promise belonged to duty or something deeper. Outside, wind moved through Ashthorne Manor like an approaching storm, pressing against windows and stone as if the estate itself sensed what was coming next. And within its walls, beneath polished order and noble silence, every faction was already preparing for the next move in a game that had stopped being about identity and had become about survival. If this story pulled you in even a little, take a moment to subscribe to Sandy Love Tales so you don't miss what happens next. And if it reminded you of someone you deeply care about, share this story with that special person in your heart, because sometimes stories like this feel closest when they are not heard alone.